Here's to you.
Cheers, Norm. Good to see you this Sunday afternoon.
Uh-huh.
Thank you for this lovely cocktail.
Put that right there.
Okay.
So,
We just wanted to talk a little bit about Rosedale today.
I think that's great.
Norm and I, we met, what is it, Norm, 40, 50 years ago? Grade 8. Grade 8 would have been 1970 something or other.
I'm afraid I can't do those calculations.
Yeah.
I never
I think
could.
1972 we were in grade 8 at Deer Park.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Deer Park Junior High or something
Yeah,
like that, right?
at Ferndale and St. Clair. And you had come from Rosedale Public.
That's right.
And I had come from Whitney.
Yeah.
And we met there.
Now, why did you end up going to Whitney?
Because of the zoning.
Oh, right.
You
were in North Rosedale.
Yes, I was in North Rosedale.
You were in Roxborough.
I grew up on Roxborough Drive.
Yeah.
And you grew up at the Glen Road.
Yeah.
In the south Rosedale portion.
I was across on the wrong side of the tracks really when it came to Rosedale.
Yeah. Oh no, we always thought that we were on the wrong side of the tracks. And I remember your house, you had the most beautiful porch or veranda, as it would have been called on that house.
Big veranda. It was great. We used to sit out there. I used to go out there and actually practice on the veranda now that I think of it.
Because you were even playing the violin then.
Well, not until high school actually.
Right.
When at Jarvis, but that's when I started lessons. But
so when did your parents move in? What's their story?
so I was born in Newmarket in 1958.
58, yeah.
And in 1965, Dad, he was a young graphic designer, he joined a company. He joined a company named Templeton. Charles Templeton, I think was his name, and it became Hathaway Templeton or Templeton Hathaway, and they had an office on Overlea.
Right.
And so rather than having to commute, because the Don Valley Parkway didn't exist then,
right,
and the 401 was just being built.
Wow.
Which is hard to believe.
We're old.
So Dad would travel down Woodbine Avenue all the way from Newmarket to Overlea Boulevard.
Wow.
And so I guess when the opportunity came, he decided to look for a house in Toronto and was able to find that house in Rosedale on Glen Road, number 76. And in 1965, if my recollection is correct, they paid about $55,000, which was a handsome amount of money back
then. Yeah.
So Dad was doing okay he was definitely he would definitely one of the Mad Men designers. He was part of after Templeton, he started his own company, but he was involved in the design of the Canadian flag under Robarts. He was working with Robarts.
Yeah.
Premier Robarts at the time.
John, I think it was.
John Robarts.
Yeah.
And also, because of that relationship too, he and his company were given the task of redesigning the Ontario emblem, which became the Trillium.
Yeah.
So it was
fascinating.
He designed the Ontario Trillium.
I remember your dad driving around Rosedale in his great collection of cars.
Right.
And it was back in the day, I think Chitty Chitty Bang Bang had just come out. And I remember thinking of him and as Dick Van Dyke in that car with his tweed hat on.
And the goatee and the mustache. It definitely. Yeah, the cars were a big part of our background, and Dad collected antique cars. He was never without a Model T Ford. So Dad lived until he was 96, and from the age of 14, he was never without a Model T in his garage.
Amazing.
So those were the days, but Rosedale was a wonderful place to grow up, that's for sure. And you were up on Roxborough.
Yes, we were on Roxborough, and my parents were still married then, and they came from Pickering. And my father was the law reporter or the entertainment editor for the Toronto Star, and my mother was an illustrator for Simpsons. And back in the day, she used to do the drawings of all the clothes because, of course, that's how you saw things. And she would freehand, pages of women in girdles and bras and gowns and men in suits. And I mean, she was extraordinarily good at it. And so they moved into Rosedale in 1964, 111 Roxborough, which is actually on the market as we speak.
Yeah.
And she lived in the house. She was the matriarch of the street. And in 2021, she passed away and the house was sold. But they paid the vast sum of $32,000 for the house in 1964. And she paid off her mortgage when she was 65 years old, because that's how it was set up. But it was a great street to grow up on. Rosedale Park was right there. And we used to have on the street, I remember vividly, every fall we'd have a massive acorn fight. And one side of the street would fight the other side of the street.
What was it? Throwing
acorns. And the rectory of St. Paul's Church was right across the street from us. And Phil Dan, who lived there, was the sort of an amazing acorn organizer fight. And we'd all have those old wooden apple baskets, and we'd fill them up with acorns, and we'd be on either side of the street, and then we'd start whipping them at each other. That was back in the day when you were sent outside and told to come in when the street lights were on, and nobody worried about where you are, in spite of the fact that we had no phones, and things have certainly got more complicated. But then we went on to Jarvis, didn't we?
Right.
Yeah.
We went on to Jarvis. That's how, and so it was just an easy walk from our place.
Yeah.
Straight down Glen Road, then we would take the Glen Road walking bridge, or else the Sherburne Bridge, straight down to Jarvis. But that when you were on Roxborough, so you take Glen Road north across the bridge, the big Glen Road Bridge. Mm-hmm. You'd hit Roxborough, and then which would you turn left? You go.
If we were coming toward North Rosedale.
Yeah.
Yeah, you turn left, and it was that little section between Glen Road and Schofield, right in there, that little section of it. Because of course Roxborough has various forms. It's Roxborough Drive east of Mount Pleasant, then it's Roxborough Street west of Mount Pleasant, and then it's Roxborough Street east, I should say, and then Roxborough Street west over to Avenue Road.
I could never get it straight. So someone would say Roxborough, and it would be that could mean anywhere.
Right. I think the amazing thing about the neighborhood that we grew up in, and I'm certainly privileged to be living there myself, is that it looks exactly the same way it looked when we were kids. The outside facades, of course, some of them have been painted or changed, or the windows are different, but essentially it's the same place. It's gone through the decades of the harvest gold and avocado green appliances coming out, and everything changing. The occupations have changed of the people that live there, and so much has happened in what I guess amounts to 2 generations.
Well, and I think about when we moved to Glen Road in '65, we were moving into a house that was actually part of the Massey family. This guy, the family that sold it to my dad. His name was Massey, and he was a very, very, I remember he was like 7 feet tall. He was called Moose Massey was his nickname. But this was a family, they were the second owners of the house since it was built.
Right.
They raised a family there, I guess through the war, and then by the time 1965 rolled by, I guess it was just the widow, and the kids had all gone. And this was a very common theme in Rosedale at the time. We had families that were now, or the generation was sort of at its there was usually a widow who had owned the house, had long been there. Nothing had been done to the houses.
Right.
They were in original, incredible shape, but totally unupdated.
Well, same with Mums. The people that built the house, the Plants, built it in the end of the century, and they were the ones that died in it.
Yeah.
Or not in it, but died.
Yeah.
So Mum was the second owner.
Yeah. Yeah. So
nothing had been done, to your point.
So they were Mum and Dad moved in. Mum was pregnant with the third child, fourth child, I should say. I was the third. And there was nothing to do to the house. They just moved in and lived in it until the 90s when that changed. But I was just getting to the point that the people that were moving into Rosedale at the time were taking over from these families that were at sort of that stage, elderly parents. And then, so it was a demographic of young artists, young professionals were moving in. And these houses were not in great shape, a lot of them.
No, and the interest in, I think I remember when one of our neighbors got a blender.
Yeah.
I distinctly remember, and it popped out of the countertop. And I mean, it was that sort of, thing that people were thinking about. We weren't in the place where, we weren't thinking of cocooning the way we are now and the way that we live now. And there wasn't the same, I guess, understanding or desire to have everything just so.
Right.
You could have things that were, you could leave a wet towel somewhere. You could, you ran in and out of the house, and people didn't even have air conditioning.
Yeah.
The windows were cranked open, and
that's right.
The
houses, it seemed to be a mentality of the houses served the purpose. They were in great shape. There was nothing really that needed to be done.
Yeah.
I think it's also coming out of these are children of depression families,
the war, Second
and
World War.
these were fantastic homes, and so their changes started to happen that much later in Rosedale than when we were there. So when you case in point about that, they look the same. They do look the same, but the streets have remained the same. But there's been a shift in terms of renovations over time.
And certainly the ability, I guess things are relative to a certain extent, but the ability to get into the neighborhood and, raise a family has become, a really tough thing to do. And so, but I will say that I think my parents, particularly my mother, really scrimped and was very, very frugal. And I think that that's how she managed to hold on to that house for as long as she did. And I think that had we ended up somewhere else, how drastically different our lives would have been, and what an incredible place it is to raise a family.
Yeah, we had great schools. We have great schools
Yeah.
there. Always a fantastic feeling of neighborhood. As you said
Community.
before, we could walk the streets until late at night, and
Safe.
no one ever thought of it. We'd walk to school.
Yeah.
Like, it was just boot us out the door and
Yeah.
off we go.
And our parents were at work when we got home, and
Yeah.
we fended for ourselves. And it's interesting to think now, because I know that when I raised my kids in Rosedale, and they went to Whitney, and Vince went off to UCC, Jillian went to Northern, that I was much more worried about making sure. Often I'd drive them in the morning, and they were carted off to sporting activities and to sleepovers, and very rarely. And I think it was on the heels of Toronto, that feeling of you had Emmanuel Jacks, that little shoeshine boy, kind of shocked Toronto, and after that, people were. It seemed much different. It had kind of come of age like so many cities in America and that kind of thing. So we just were more. I think we raised not a paranoid generation, but that now our kids are maybe much more relaxed than we were, but we were let go so much.
But we had similar influences, though. I remember, going to Rosedale Public School, and then Deer Park, and then Jarvis, and the proximity that Rosedale has to the downtown core.
Yes.
So Jarvis was a great mix of people of different demographics.
Yes.
It was a great environment to be in. You had sort of the Rosedale demographic. Then we had downtown. Different.
We had the Regent Park area. We had
Yeah.
Chinatown. And we had, everybody, we just mixed together, and nobody
blend.
thought anything of it.
No one had any. No one thought about it at all.
Yeah.
There was no kind of feeling that this was different or that you were different than that.
Yeah.
But I remember those growing up, and I always had thinking about Ramsden Park and what's the school? Jesse Ketchum.
Right.
And we'd have these. There was always these kind of a rivalry in terms of they were tough kids coming from
we thought
there.
they were.
We thought they were.
Yeah,
Exactly.
we thought they were. Yeah.
But we had influences like that played in our consciousness, but there was never a feeling of
them and us.
Yeah.
And I remember we used to that there was a park down in behind Rosedale subway station, and when we got into when we got into Jarvis, we'd run amok, and all the kids would meet down there, and we called it Itchy-Coo Park. We thought we were so cool.
Itchy-Coo.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
I don't know, maybe a song. I think it was the song. And then we ended up, that was sort of when we all had our first one too many sips of baby duck.
Mm-hmm.
And and then we'd get on the Rosedale bus or we'd walk home.
I would go over to Spencer McNeil's house.
Right.
And that was Roxborough. He lived on Roxborough, but close to Yonge Street.
Right.
So that was Roxborough West.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we'd go there on a Friday night after dinner, and then I'd meet up with Spencer, and there'd usually be some alcoholic influence. I don't remember where it came from or how, but then we'd end up at the park, at Itchy-Coo Park behind Subway, and a lot of people were back there causing trouble in our own quiet way.
Yeah. Well, we never. I think we. And it was everybody. I mean, even the nerds were doing it because you were a nerd.
I was a nerd.
Yeah,
sure.
you were a nerd, and I got in some trouble, but not bad trouble, good trouble, typical trouble. And then you went off to U of T after Jarvis.
Yep.
Yeah.
Went to Jarvis or U of T Faculty of Music, and became a violinist, and that's a different story. And what happened to you?
I went off to King's College in Halifax, and I took Soviet studies.
Wow.
It was, I don't know, I read Solzhenitsyn, and after that I had to, I fancy. I mean, without the language, there wasn't much of a career involved in it, but it was very interesting, great sort of broad arts degree. And then after that, I ended up working for 30 years for a company, a high-end company as a director of sales, which was great. And then I decided I just wasn't quite ready to retire and got into real estate. And that's how we
So you and I met again.
we met again. And thought...
We met at the Pilot.
Yeah, we met at the Pilot. We went to a 200th Jarvis reunion, I think it was.
200?
Was it 200?
Were we there 200 years ago?
Wasn't Jarvis there at 200?
No, it was definitely...
No, I mean, it was the celebration of the 200. Yeah, and then...
I guess that's what it was.
I think it was, yeah. And that was a great... that Pilot is fabulous.
Yeah, and owned by Jarvis family, our family of Rosedale Jarvisites.
Yeah.
So there was Steve Conover,
Al Stewart,
Chuck Higgins,
yeah,
who was an good old friend of my brother George's.
Art Potts, I think, was in there.
Was involved. Ted Gretzner.
Yep, Ted. Yep, for sure.
Adam Brake was in there.
I think maybe at the beginning.
Yeah, he was. He came in and out of there. I don't know what happened to Adam. But yeah, there was but all.
He would argue, but I thought of him as my first boyfriend. Actually,
is that right?
He would never agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it was certainly my first kiss at the reservoir, the Rosehill Reservoir.
The reservoir at St. Clair.
Yes, because at one point we all started going there. I don't know, maybe we got kicked out of Itchy-Coo.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
It was maybe a little farther to go too.
Yeah.
Maybe not for you, but for us.
Yeah, you would have had to come across the
Rosedale
bridge.
types. But Adam and I had a rivalry because in Rosedale because he and I were both fast runners. So Adam and I always were the rivals on running, and along with Richard Potts.
Right.
Richard had fast legs too. We must have gotten used to running away from things.
Well, did you do the races when you were at Mayfair?
Yeah, that's right.
Win your ribbons and
also just within there were always these track meets and stuff that we go to inter-school ones.
Yeah, Pierce Park. Remember That's
we
where
get these blue ribbons or the red ribbons. Yeah, those
and
are
they
great
were
memories.
amazing ribbons.
Yeah,
they weren't just they had like, they were like the horse ones.
Yeah. But Adam Brake, he was a fast runner. Adam and I and Richard Potts and the
You
Potts
were the
family.
runners.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
God bless the Potts family, for sure. Yeah.
but that was Roxborough. Who else on Roxborough did we know?
Well, there was the Phillipses.
And where were they on
They were at 120 Roxborough.
Yeah.
And then there was the Cathcarts. Scott
Oh,
Cathcart,
right.
they were across the street. There was Phil Dan. The Weebers were next
Oh,
door.
no, and so this is the Roxborough of your
My
Roxborough
Roxborough.
versus Adam Brake's Roxborough.
Yes, because he was across
He
Young
was
Street.
the other side of Mount Pleasant.
Mount Pleasant, yeah.
Yeah.
I was in the, in the better part.
Right, exactly.
And, but we had the Keltons. We had the Howards. I can remember everybody and who lived in the houses and the dogs. The other difference was everybody's dog could roam the streets. You didn't have to have your dog on a leash. So there was Pickles and Tuppy and Phoebe and Agamemnon and all these dogs.
Agamemnon?
And they would they lie in the middle of the street. You'd call your dog the same way you called your kid. Dinner time. Dog would, you didn't have to worry. No one even picked up their poo.
Yeah.
But there just wasn't as many of them, I don't think.
Well, we dealt with it differently maybe. Didn't notice it. The
Yeah,
dog
maybe.
poo.
Yeah, nobody cared until things became more highbrow in the
Yeah,
neighborhood.
exactly.
Yeah.